And where are you right now?
Chicago, Illinois,
Right.
hometown.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So I wanted to do this with you because I know you had me when you were 40. So there's a little bit of an age difference between us. So we kind of have a lot of years covered. So I wanted to talk about the differences between your like upbringing and education compared to mine and just I guess like progress that has been made since then. So the first thing I'm curious about is what school was like for you growing up.
School was a fun place growing up because a lot of the children that lived in the neighborhood that I played with, that I fought with, we were in classes together. So that's, an extension of community. It was a lot of fun going to school.
Was your school really small? Like, did you know all of the kids basically the entire time from kindergarten onward, or?
You pretty much knew the children that were in your class from kindergarten onward. The children that spent the year with you in that class, y'all got to know each other pretty well. And you knew a
And
few
your
children that weren't in your class too.
yeah. And your school was like a neighborhood school, right? So it was just
Yes,
kids that lived in that area.
yes, that's what
So
it
can you
was.
talk a little bit about your neighborhood growing up and what it looked like and just, I guess, the time period at that point in Chicago?
Okay. I started kindergarten in 1958. And most of the parents here, I would say like 98% of the parents here, they came here during World War II to get better job opportunities. I lived in a predominantly African American community. So most of our parents were on the same page. They all came from the South in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, like that. And they were raising the first generation of children here in North Lawndale. And this had been a Jewish community, and there were a lot of Jewish symbols on the churches and buildings and things like that. So it was a tight knit community as families knew each other, and it was just peaceful to grow up here. We played outside, and had to be told to come inside usually when the street lights came on. Yeah, you had to be in. During the week, we went to school. A lot of our parents might have worked. Um, Fathers, definitely, if they were alive and in the home, a lot of them were back then. They worked, and moms were at home, and sometimes moms worked too. So it, I loved growing up in North Lawndale. It was so beautiful, flowers, Douglas Park, and people were looking after the little ones. We were the little ones back then.
Did you ever think about the fact that you were in basically an entirely African American neighborhood, or did it ever occur to you that everyone in your school looked like you?
Oh yeah, it occurred to me because we all were trying to wear the same styles and do the same things. Yes, it occurred to me that we were in an African American community because this was the community my parents moved into. A lot of the other parents moved into. They were able to buy a house, and and the children flourished. So yeah, I knew it was an African American community, and I was in an African American school predominantly in terms of the student body. Teachers, they have always been white and other groups, but mostly white and some black teachers as well.
So when you were a student, like when you were younger in school, did you feel like you do you have any memories of instances where maybe your teachers didn't see eye to eye or maybe understand the culture of the students that they were teaching?
Well, my black teachers did. I had an incident in fifth grade with this old white woman. She didn't understand our culture at all. she would say, ooh, and she'd take a bucket and walk through the classroom, a little bucket. She'd say, you need some water to make your brain grow. And Miss Toucher would throw that water on black girl's hair. I had been pressed, okay, straightened, and she throwing water on her head so it can kink up. Mamas, yeah, I do remember that. And the mamas was waiting for her outside. And my mother stopped them from whooping her behind.
That's
My mother
wild.
single handedly. Yeah, she stopped it. She said, no, I'm going to talk to her because y'all going to go to. She said, but I can talk to her. And she ain't going to be throwing no more water on anybody's hair.
That's
So
wild.
I was aware. I was aware that you got people working here that do really don't know nothing about us. And then I had a Greek teacher. I think he was a substitute, a regular substitute. He
Hmm.
didn't know a lot of things either, because he would say to me, "Oh, so y'all rent? I know we don't rent. We own. Everybody that's black don't rent, just like everybody that white don't own." I would say that, but we didn't use the words black and white. Then I would say about it Caucasian, and then we were calling ourselves Negroes back then and colored people like that. So I told him everybody colored don't own, and everybody colored don't rent. It's just a mix like anybody else's group. Then I asked him,
So,
did he
in
own?
what did you say?
He looked at me all funny and stuff, and I just said, I gotta go. It's time for me to go out, go to eat. It's lunchtime. I got time.
How old
You
were
can call
you
my
when
mother.
this was happening?
Oh, third grade.
Oh my
What's?
god. I see where I get it from.
Yes, you do.
So, okay, so like in today's world, the two things you just described, I think if somebody were being generous, they would describe those as microaggressions. Personally, I'd say throwing water on students' hair is macroaggression. But we have a way to talk about that. We have words to address those
Mhm.
things, social media, like we have different ways to share them. But since when you were growing up, there were no cell phones, there's no Twitter, no TikTok, nothing like that. Did you have conversations about these kinds of things? And was it
Yes,
something that was more public or was it more like at home?
we had conversations about it. Uh, I told my mom, I said, see, you should have let him go on and whoop that woman because you know what? She pushed my baby brother once, and I like to got hold to her because he came to bring me my raincoat, and she pushed him. Now he was a big guy, so he just like rocked. He didn't go down. Anybody else would have went down. And so when I got home, um, he had already told mom that Miss Touchruff had pushed him. So she explained to me, she ain't gonna push no other kid. This is going to stop, but I don't need you to threaten anybody. I said, I just gonna grab it. That's all. She said, no, you couldn't do that. I know you ain't because your baby brother. So we had conversations in the household.
So, did you ever, I guess what I'm asking is, did you ever think about why your school was all African American? Like
Mm-hmm.
Chicago was pretty segregated at that period in time,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
That's
would
what it
argue
was
that it still kind of is in some places, but
in some
legally
places.
back
Yes.
then it was segregated. So I'm wondering just what that was like for you growing up, or how you thought about it, or how you talked about it.
Well, one incident that happened when I was a kid, they had the Willis wagons. Let me tell you what it was real quick. There's these short yellow school buses, and I can't look at a short yellow school bus today and not think, hmm. So what they were doing, the black community was growing. We were, it's more and more. It was growing, and I recognized we were in all black schools and all black neighborhoods because the white power structure didn't want us outside of that. But as we began to grow, things began to get really heated. And one thing was the Willis wagons, because they would take black students from an overpopulated grade school to an underpopulated grade school, was probably still black, okay? And and that's what they were doing. They're trying everything, because Mayor Daley was the mayor, the old man. Old
The
Daily, old
first
man
grade
Daily.
daily.
Old man Daily. That's what we called him. So he didn't want to integrate. So they were doing all kinds of crazy things to keep us in this black belt. So yes, I knew we went all black schools because of politics, not because of intelligence on the part of the students. Because we brilliant, some of us anyway.
Did you ever think that wasn't fair, or did you ever wonder if that was affecting your opportunities with education? Like, did you ever think that the kids, like, in white schools are getting better opportunities or had better resources, or is that something you didn't think about at that age?
I wondered about a lot of things. That's something I
Mhm.
wondered about. You know, if you're getting better resources, why we can't get good resources? Because our parents own homes too. Come on now. I wondered. My mother told me just to keep living, and I get answers to what I needed to get answers to. Thank God for Ebony magazine because they talked about all this kind of stuff. And I read. I've been reading since I was a kid, like first, second grade.
Do you remember the first time that you saw something in print about it? Or also, do you remember when segregating schools started to stop, started to change?
Well, on the news, back then we didn't have color TV. We had black and white, grainy looking footage. I knew about the segregation in the South.
Mhm.
Okay, I knew about black people going to, integrate schools in the South, like the Little Rock children um, in Little Rock, Arkansas. Integrating that high school. That was in the 50s, and I saw that on television, and I saw Ruby Bridges on television. Snippets of them going into schools, and Ruby Bridges was like, I think anywhere from 6 to 8 years old, if she was that old, going into New Orleans public school and integrating it. So I knew what was going on around me in the country, yes. And I knew it would come to Chicago at some point, and it did.
And it did. So,
Mm.
between did you all call it middle school? Was it just elementary
No,
school the whole time?
elementary. Elementary is kindergarten through 8th grade.
I feel like that's not true anymore because you have these little sixth graders, fifth graders sometimes that are like, I'm a middle schooler. But anyway,
We
so
were
you
no
did all
middle
of
school.
that. You did
Hmm.
all of that at the same school, right? Everything was at
No, not
Howard or
everybody
no?
did. I did it to 6th grade because Howland didn't go
Mhm.
past 6th grade at that time.
Howland. Why did I just
And
call your school Howard? Yes, Howland. I remember.
Howland,
Yes, I remember.
HOWLEND.
I remember.
And okay, let me tell you, honey. And Hess Upper Grade Center, which is now Lawndale Community School. Hess was
Mhm.
the what you would call middle school, but they didn't call it that. They just said you're going 7th and 8th grade to that school. That's it. They didn't really give it a name like it's middle school. It's still your elementary education. You ain't out yet. But that
And
school
then,
was just for 7th and 8th grade, and they built a new addition when I
but it
came.
was still
Come
like in
on.
the same area. Like you used to walk to school every day.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Uh-huh.
And then when you went to high school, well, where did you go initially?
Initially, we had to go to the neighborhood high school.
Mhm.
This is when things began to change. I did 1 year at Farragut High School. Okay, 23rd and Christiana, I think it was located. So it had black people, majority, but it had white people and it had some Spanish speaking people too. Probably more of them
Oh,
than white folk. Hmm. So I went there for my freshman year. I was 14 years old.
so what was that like?
Yeah, it was interesting. Kids were kids. Some people, uh, how can I say it? They got sense. They ask questions. They learn about other cultures. Then other people just be stupid. That's all. But I wasn't calling any names because I think I looked like I might hurt someone. And after my first year, I told my
So
mom, I ain't going back to this school. Don't send me back here. I don't
Yeah,
like
so
it.
why
I don't
didn't you
like it.
want to go back
I just
other than not
didn't
liking
like
it?
it.
Well,
I
that's
didn't
great,
like
but
it. It's
why?
just something about the atmosphere I wasn't too fond of.
Was
It
it
just didn't.
okay, so, like, were your schools did you have, like, academically competitive schools at that time? Was that a thing in Chicago, or is it just kind of like where you lived is where you went to school?
It's where you live, it's where you went to school for the majority of Black students.
Okay. So you didn't go back to Farragut, so then where did you go?
No, I told my
And
mom,
what happened?
I'm about to kill everybody up in here. If you send me back, I'm not playing, mom. She said, look, we don't have to do all that. Okay. So
Right, so
we
she sent
talked,
you somewhere else.
yeah, because we got the
Yeah.
papers for the permissive transfer program, which took place in Chicago then. And there were schools that openly wanted more diversity. So you could fill out the form, or your mom did, or dad, and whoever was taking care of you. Would fill out the forms and send them to the Board of Education, and they would, process them. And my mom asked me to see the list. She said, I don't mind you going to an integrated school, but after Farragut, look here, I'm not going to go to jail. She said, if I send you to Bogan, and we knew Bogan School, because my neighbor, Mrs. Watson's, lived next door to us, and she had been living next door to us until she passed on. So she's been there since I was a kid. Her grandson went to Bogan, and it was 25 Black students there. They chased their behinds home every day. Mama said, "You can't go to that school, because see, I'll be in the electric chair twice." She said, "So you can't go to Bogan." So when I showed her the list of all the schools, she said, "You go to Wells High School, because it's at Ashland and Augusta. It's predominantly Spanish speaking area. Kids are bilingual, they speak Spanish. We didn't say bilingual then. She said they can speak Spanish and they can speak English, because they grew up in this country. But it's predominantly Spanish speaking people. And there are white people there too, but a lot of them, maybe, you know, first, second generation, Eastern European. So she said, I think you can deal with that better. So let's try that. So I said, okay, because they didn't have but 10% Black people in the school, if they had those many.
Do you know how many
It's,
students you had total?
I don't know how many I graduated with, but I don't know how many students overall. So
Like,
I'm
how
just
many
going to
did you
do
graduate with?
300.
So if you had between 900 and 1,000 students, then only 100 were Black?
Something like that.
That's wild to me. So what was that like? What was your first year there like?
Well, my first year there was interesting because, with children, this is the first time I went to school with children that spoke Spanish as their native language. It's the first time I was around Native American children, because they had a lot of Choctaw and Cree. Cree is out of Louisiana, so they had some kids there with Cree, Choctaw, a few other tribal groups, Cherokee. So it was interesting, and I loved that. And I felt very comfortable, in the environment. Hanging out at the malt shop at lunchtime, eating 2 hot dogs, having my fries, and taking $1 and get 7 plays of different kind of music on the jukebox, because that was during the time, Motown was still kicking it. A lot of kids were listening to Motown. It didn't matter that they were from Slovenia or whatever in Eastern Europe, and if they first or second generation, they my age, we all listening some of the same stuff. So it was fun. I enjoyed it.
So what year did you first start at that school with the permissive transfer?
1968 in the fall.
So what was going on in the country at that time? Or what had happened recently?
Um, in
A lot,
68,
but but in 68
I know
specific.
Dr. King had been
Yeah.
assassinated. My neighborhood was no longer the neighborhood I grew up in. It had been burned to the ground, pretty much. Some buildings didn't get burned down. Where I lived on the block I lived on St. Louis, it hadn't gotten burned down, but a lot of businesses were no longer there. And here we are now, and still a lot of businesses are not there. It's just vacant lots. So it was in '68, it was a lot of things that happened, you know.
So, was that something you talked about in school, or do you feel like that affected your education? Did it seem like your classmates cared about that, even if it wasn't like their group, their people?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we talked about it because he said, they can't imagine, although some of them could because they came from Europe and they might have been a minority ethnicity in Europe, which I didn't have the words for it then, but they might have gone through some things and they could understand. So yeah. Mhm.
so do you think the kids that were more traditionally bused, so they didn't have the permissive transfer, or maybe it was, like, less of a choice to experience that type of education, do you think they had a similar experience to you or different? And if you think it was different, how?
I'm not sure,
Yeah,
other than to say it might have been some differences because see, when you're bused in this traditional sense
like,
of being
traditional
bused,
busing, yeah.
it's a bunch of y'all put on the bus. Whoever you gonna bus, though that group of people put on that bus, and you drive up to that school on that bus, and the police are standing by the door. The police of the vehicle standing by the door in the school, and y'all get off and go into school, and you could see it on television. You can hear it from people who were bused, name calling, and folks want to throw rocks and bottles and act a fool. So that's a whole different ball game as compared to a school that says, yes, we would like to have more diversity, and you
Mhm.
fill out forms to attend that school. You take public transportation,
So
and
did it feel like a
idiots would
more
fight.
oh, sorry. Yeah, at your
Idiots
school
would
too?
fight.
Or outside of
No,
your school?
my school, no, no, you ain't gonna clown me. You clown it, well, you get kicked out probably same day.
Was it more academically rigorous, do you think?
At Wells, well, let me say this: Wells had been traditionally, and it hadn't changed because they integrated, it hadn't changed,
Mhm.
a good high school, if I can say that academically. It had remained that for many, many years. So it hadn't changed by the '60s when I got there.
So, while you were there, after your first year, did you see more diversity as each year went on, or did it kind of stay the same as it was when you first started attending? And I don't just mean Black students, but just in general, like maybe more Indigenous American students, more was Latino the term in the 60s? Like, did people use Latinx? Do you know? Did you say, like, something different?
It was a lot of Latinos at the school. It was
Yeah.
predominantly between Mexican and Puerto Ricans that were
Well, that's
there,
still
and
true
then
in
people,
Chicago, so yeah,
and from and
that's true
then
for me
after
too.
that, we got Ecuador,
Yeah,
Guatemala. They from like Panama, different places. You know,
yeah. So you feel like all of
Uruguay,
that altogether
Uruguay,
was, like,
Paraguay,
an inclusive environment then?
exclusive,
Inclusive, not
inclusive.
exclusive. Yeah.
Yes, it was inclusive. That was my first time in all my life being at a school that's inclusive with the student body. That was the first time.
So compared to, your teacher who was throwing water on students' hair, do you have maybe a positive experience with a teacher at Wells to contrast that?
Well, I had positive experiences with my teachers at Howland because had they not prepared me, there's no way I could go to Wells and be the A student I was.
So then what were the similarities between the teachers you had at Howland and at Wells that were, like, a positive impact?
They were the older ones, they old
Mhm.
school, so they taught the same. They didn't play with us. You got a test. You're gonna take this test. You're gonna do this thing, and if you don't make the grade, we're gonna fail you. There's no excuses for this. So I had old school teachers at both schools.
So at your high school, how did it feel being at a school that was more inclusive?
Felt really relaxing to me. I enjoyed it. Everybody just be everybody, and I enjoyed that. And when I would sit down at the lunchroom table, you can best believe everybody was over there at the lunchroom table. It was one of those kind of things. Got so good to us, we had to have two long lunchroom tables in the room where we all could sit there because everybody was welcome. There was no problem there. So we
Yeah, do
talked
you remember
a
any of
lot
your
of different
friends
things, you know.
from high school, like your close friends at Wells?
Yeah, there was quite a few of
Yeah.
them. Jean was
Pick
Jean
one.
was one
Pick
of
one.
them.
Tell me.
Jean was one of them. She was African American like myself, and she was not from the West Side. She's from the South Side. And then
Oh.
there were other kids that were, living in the neighborhood, and they were. See, this has been over 50 years ago, so this is I've been in high school, so I got to think about this. But there were quite a few people that I talked to. Jason was an indigenous person, and his sister Winona. I think they were Cherokee. They were always at my table, and it's quite a few people, quite a few people. If I look at their pictures, I can remember their names, when I see their faces. But it's quite a few kids,
I feel
you
like you told me stories of, positive things, but
know.
yeah, what did you talk about with your friends or what kind of things were going on with you all while you were there?
Well, like typical teenagers, you're talking about
Mhm.
coming to the dance. I couldn't go to any of the dances because I didn't have a car, you see. And mama didn't want me on the bus. So she said, forget the dances. You ain't going to no dance. But there were a few. Come to think of it, there were a few that went to. So we're talking about music. We're listening to Jimi Hendrix. We're listening to Motown. We're listening to Stax. My friends, some of them were doing, you know, drugs. They were doing the big thing was psychedelic stuff. And I remember when I went to the place I used to hang out at lunchtime all the time. It was a malt shop, and he would hold the pills in his hand, but he'd hold it under the counter. He said, "Take one. This is one of those hallucinogenics." He's a little blonde haired, blue eyed white boy. I told him, I ain't taking nothing. Are you kidding? Come on, Dugan, I ain't taking that stuff. He said, you a trip. I said, hell yeah, I'll trip. I'll probably do something I'll regret. I ain't taking it. Don't offer me nothing. He said, okay. So they didn't offer me the drugs no more. They called me
I
aspirin
appreciate
head.
that it was the '60s,
They
euphoria
called me
before it was
aspirin
cool,
head
I guess. Yeah, of course they
because
did,
of
of
that, because
course
I
they
wouldn't
did.
take anything.
So, yeah, it sounds like you had mostly positive experiences, but what kind of did you have any negative ones? And then also, what kind of extracurriculars did you do? Because I feel like I remember you telling me a story when I was a child about a club you tried to join.
Oh, that was in college.
Oh, so that wasn't
That was
in
in
okay.
college.
So did you have
Cause
anything
see,
like that there? Like in high school, did you have any like heritage
uh,
oriented clubs or anything?
the black students created what they said was a Black American History Club, but
Mhm.
we fell out because I went to a meeting and they told me I wasn't black enough. Okay. And I told them, guess what? Your leader that started this club got a white girlfriend. I'm coming up in this mob if I want to. They said, we're going to call the police. I said, call in. I don't care. You don't tell me who's black and who isn't. You got a lot of nerve. So what you
Oh.
gonna do to me? You gonna come outside and whip me? Because you gonna get hurt. I'm from the west side and you from the south. You can get ready to get beat down. So they went and got the police, the regular police officer that worked there, come upstairs. He was Italian to get me. He said, Beverly, let's go. He said, come on now. I don't want to have to call your mother. You know how your mother is. I said, they know how my
So
mama is. Walk away. So I didn't join. I said,
so
forget y'all.
so you didn't do it. Okay, so by the time you were graduating from Wells, like your senior year, I guess what
Mm-hmm.
was your outlook? How were you thinking about education at that point based on all of your experiences?
I'm thinking whoever made this decision to keep these young people segregated from each other, y'all stupid. Y'all stupid and stupider and stupidest. Y'all just need to be kicked. That's what I thought.
So
Thought it
then
was a bunch of
how
political nonsense.
yeah. So how did school desegregation impact you? And how do you think that it impacted the way that you then kind of planned for my education as a kid? Because obviously by the time I was in school, the system was very, very different. So,
Yes, it was very different. Um, it's good to go to school and have to worry about what matters. And what matters is your education. So it's good to be next to people who everybody don't have to look alike.
mhm,
Everybody don't have to be of the same ethnicity, same race, and all that. That's not necessary. What is necessary that we all need to learn. Okay, we all need to have that hardcore old world backup that says you're gonna learn this. If you don't learn, we're gonna fail you. You'll be back in next year, kind of thing. And that's the way I felt school should have been in the beginning.
mm,
It should have been it's free for people to go wherever you live. But see, by that time you came along,
yeah,
there was a different pattern of where people lived as opposed to when
entirely
I was
different.
in school. Yeah. Mhm. Because see,
Yeah,
you
so
all had but magnet schools. We didn't have no magnet schools.
do you remember when those, like, what year they started?
Probably I want to say the late 60s, because I think Lynn Bloom was built. And I remember on television hearing people talk. It was a school where they said it ain't gonna be predominantly no one race of kids up in here. Because Lynn Bloom was a math and science specialty school in high school. And so everybody went. If you remember the Fergusons on the block where I live,
Mhm.
Doreen went there. She went because he's brilliant. And she went to Lynn Bloom. So by that time, it was about your academics pretty much. I mean, you can always argue how much your academics mattered or whatever, but
Mm.
it was pretty much about academics. And that started in the late 60s, pretty much.
So you're a teacher now, and I'm just curious if, based on what you've seen as a teacher, what you've seen like with your educational history, what you've seen with my educational history, and just kind of how you and dad basically pushed me to go to a gifted school, and then I went to a magnet school. So I always went to a diverse school and I never went to a neighborhood school. So I feel like I had that different experience. But I guess seeing that, how did that shape, like, you as an educator? And if you were, like, telling someone about, I don't know, American history and desegregation, like, what's one thing you would want them to know?
Well, it shaped me as a teacher because I've, ever since I started teaching, I was put into, okay, this is our beautiful cat right here. He wants to get on camera. Um, what what happened for me is I saw the importance of people going to school together. That's important.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't matter with the kids, and it matters what you teach. It's very important. So once I started teaching, I got singled out to be put into a classroom of multi ethnic, multiracial, tribal children. That's something that has happened to me from when I first started teaching. If I was in a predominantly uh, one black classroom, it's predominantly black at Ben Franklin, that got switched real quick.
Mhm.
And when I moved on to finishing my education a second time, getting another degree, that's where I was put. Once I came out of that program, that's where I was put. It's always multi ethnic, multiracial kind of things.
So going off of that, I
Far
guess
as
my last question
you're
for you
concerned,
is, yeah,
it's
yeah.
important that you have. as many opportunities as you want to have.
Okay.
And
So
I believe in a broad scope of educating all children because social emotional is part of it, where you get to know other groups of people outside of your particular group. And that's important. And it's important for social studies too. That you live your social studies. Don't just read it in a book, but that you live it.
so when you say educational opportunity, what does
I've
that mean
lost
to
you.
you? Oh, no. When you say educational
I can't
opportunity,
hear you.
what does
I
okay,
can't
okay,
hear
okay,
you.
okay, 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 okay.
Just a moment. It means that your children get a chance to learn as much as they can, different programs, because with you, there were different programs. Okay. Remember the summer
Yeah.
program you attended? That's what's important, that children get that opportunity to do different things, not just one school and just stay there, but from that school expand. And that's what's important, that you try different programs, you meet different people. That's all a part of education. Mama said you could never have education with just books. You got to have people too. So when I say educational opportunity, that's what I'm speaking of, a broad sense, broad brush used to express learning opportunities and meeting a lot of different people.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, I guess, do
Statement.
you
How do they
have
spell that?
any other yeah, no, 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 do you have any other thing that you, want to say? Or, like, anything you wish you knew, or I don't know, if you're talking to someone from the future and they were looking back, what would you say? Like, about all of this?
Humans are kind of slow sometimes, and we're taught to be fearful by the news media. But you really need to do things for yourself and see for yourself, because what they tell you sometimes and what you experience is not the same thing. And I find that people are pretty much the same throughout the world. There's always some Looney Tunes, but there are a lot of people just like you, just working class people, you know, trying to get a good education.
Dislike the space?
Um, I didn't want to go there to start. It's the neighborhood school. I did not want to go, but I had to. So that's a lot of it right there. If I tell you I don't want to do something, there's a reason. But being a kid, and I'm out of my mom's from Louisiana, so it's old world. You go. So I went. I felt that the students, they weren't that brilliant on terms of, I want to say, understanding other people. They had a tendency to be one group here at the table, one group there at the table. That's bull. Nobody like that mess. We're all students up in here. Ain't nobody got no two heads or three heads on their body. Let's stop playing. And when I would sit down sometimes and talk to people like the Spanish speaking children, like you say Latinx today. That's what you say today. Back then, it's Spanish speaking children. And we're talking, we're having fun. And, you got some black guy, some white guy, not too many white folks. I told them, like, but you going to meet me outside? They didn't want to fight. But see, with black folks, they think, okay, I can fight if I want to. No, you can't either. So they say you sit at the table with all these people. You look like them, but you black. Yeah, I know what I am and what you gonna do about it. What you think you gonna do about it. So then my Spanish speaking, friends would say, stop, just sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down. And one of them, like the biggest ones and stuff, like Maria, would stand up and say, mind your business before you get hurt. So I didn't like it. Mm-mm. I liked the few friends that I had. I kept all until we lost contact with each other. But hell no, I didn't like that school.
So you said even going in, you didn't want to go. Had you heard anything about the school before that gave you
Yeah.
that impression?
Yeah, they made all of us go there. Everybody lived in North Lawndale. They're gonna tell us if we in this zip code of 2-3, we gotta go to Farragut. That's
To
a
be fair,
lie.
that was
Yeah,
true when I was a teenager too. I didn't have to go there, but that was also my neighborhood school. So if I hadn't had
everybody
another
want.
option, I also would have had to go there. And it hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that's
I
funny.
don't want to go.
Yeah, yeah.
And can you talk a little bit more about that experience? Having, you said when you were younger, the schools you were going to was African American students, students who looked like you. And then when you switched to Farragut, was there ever a moment where you realized that, the backgrounds of the students were different and how that felt?
Well, my cousin taught there for a long time. She was an English teacher, my cousin Clara. So I already knew what the school was like and did not want to go. You can't make me want to go, but you made me go 1 year, but that's okay. I got my voice and attitude together and I ain't going no more. So I knew it was a school that was mostly black and Latino, but the Latinos were like third on the roster. It's black, Latinos, and whoever's left. But I just particularly did not want to go there. I just did not like the atmosphere in the school. You can't make me like it. It's just funky and be nice. I'm gonna it's funky. I didn't like it. Y'all looking crazy, looking upside people's heads like you gonna do something. See, you can't do that to me. I grew up in the neighborhood. Don't do that. That'll make me want to fight you. So I knew there were things in that school I just did not like.
Thank you for sharing that. What an authentic reaction. It's really nice to hear people who are willing to, be very open about their experiences. I know some people think like because we're recording, it's time to get really formal. Like this space is totally yours. And I also
I don't
had a
like it.
question.
Sure. If I don't like something, I don't like it, baby. I don't care who recording. I ain't worried about nothing. You hear me? Devil don't even bother me. He got a restraining order against me. You dig? Because I'm gonna hurt him.
Mm,
And I also have
I
a
don't care.
question for you, Kim, too. So you mentioned you had gone to magnet schools and schools that were
yeah.
naturally a more diverse space. Um, how do you think that impacted your views on education growing up?
Mm. It's interesting because so I'm biracial. So my mom's black. The person I've been interviewing the whole time about desegregation is surprisingly black, but my dad's white. So for me, like I already had a diverse family growing up, and then the neighborhood that I grew up in, I would say, was mostly Latinx. And most of my close friends, like before school was a thing, were Spanish speaking, or even like in preschool. I want to say like pretty much all of my close friends came from households where their parents were immigrants. So I feel like I already had this idea that that was like normal education wise. And I'm sure as a very young child, I didn't think about it, but definitely by the time I got to high school, it occurred to me that if I had just gone to neighborhood schools, I wouldn't have had those experiences outside of my friends. But then I would have kind of only seen like two lanes, if that makes sense. Just people from all over the world and like having different experiences. I think overall, I never worried about racism in school. And I'm not going to say that I never had a teacher who was like microaggressive or racist, but it was seriously rare. And I feel like that is something that I'm like really privileged to have had that experience. And it's probably why I've been empowered to kind of be so adventurous with education and why I'm in Scotland now, why I was like able to get a master's degree abroad, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that sounds like such
Yeah.
a cool experience.
Yeah.
And before we close out, I have one more question for you, Beverly. Is there a specific moment that you can remember that drove you to go into education? I know it sounds like there were a lot of things that you wanted to see change about the system, but I don't know if there was ever like a moment where you were absolutely like, yes, this is my decision. This is what I'm going to do?
Let me think now. When I came out of college, I graduated from Northeastern University here in Chicago. I was not working or thinking about being a teacher in terms of being in the classroom like I am now with young children, because I work with infants to 5 year olds. But my focus has been these last couple of years, 2 year olds in particular, getting them ready for preschool starting at 3 or 4. But I had never thought about being a teacher seriously. I worked in retail, I got paid well in management. I worked for Herman Sporting Goods Store, which was a big retail outlet. This is during the time of Run DMC, talking about my Adidas and wearing running suits and all that. So I had fun being a manager at a store. Fun stuff. But after a while, I got sick of it. I just got sick of retail. I said, I don't want to do it anymore. So my mom said, what you going to do? I said, oh, it hit me. I'm going to teach. But I'm going to teach younger children. I don't want high school. You can't get in my face and tell me anything because that'll make me want to fight you. So I don't want that age group. I want to work with young minds that are fresh, and if they're mad because they got to go to sleep, they can't play with the toy. That's real and it's honest. I can deal with it. But all that other micro, macro aggressions people have when they get older, no, no. We work with the little ones. So I started off with 3, 4, and 5, and then gradually worked with infants and stuff. So I knew I was going to be a teacher when I quit retail. So I don't want it no more in life.
And why do you think it's so important to focus on young children and young minds in education? I know you've touched on
So
that a
they don't,
little bit, but
we don't want them to come here backwards. We really don't in their thinking. We want them to be positive in their thinking. We want to give them words to express themselves and work with them. It's important to lay a foundation for the little ones so that by the time they get to high school, hopefully they won't be no big dummy. You know, that they'll have understanding about social emotional skills. They'll have understanding about how language is important, how to have other people tell you who they are and their stories, how to listen, all these basic things which you can really work on a child with in preschool. Well, most preschools anyway. Okay.